So I want to thank Professor José Ornelas, Carolyn Kagan, and also Fortuna Procentese for accepting this invitation. We are very happy to be able to have this discussion with you. And I'm moderating the event as a member of the ECPA, which is, you all know, the European Community Psychology Association. And I'm one of the members of the executive committee, together with Cinzia Albanese, who is the current president, Fortuna Procentese, who is also one of the presenters and is our treasurer, and also Martina Brancova, Anna Boksanin, Maria Fernandez Jesus, and Maria Vargas Muniz, who was the last president of ECPA. So this roundtable is a collective, an event we collectively organized and planned. And it's about all the new challenges for community psychology. So, of course, we are all very concerned about what is going on with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that this situation has been placing several unprecedented challenges at various levels, including health, economic, social, and political challenges. It is, of course, a highly infectious respiratory disease, which is posing a threat to everyone in all countries and communities around the world. Nonetheless, from the beginning, it was very clear to all of us, or at least to many of us, that this pandemic will have different and disparate impacts across geographical contexts and social groups, with marginalized and disadvantaged communities be more at risk and also be less likely to access mainstream support and resources. So, for example, we know that the pandemic has been particularly hard on Black, Asian migrants and minority communities in Europe and the United States, who are also represented in COVID-19 deaths. Another area of concern, it has been the impact of the pandemic and the mitigating measures, like the social distancing and self-isolation, on people's mental health, and how this is affecting some groups much more than others. So overall, we do believe that from a community psychology perspective, we need to acknowledge COVID-19 as an amplifier of inequalities, and we need to understand how we can better help those in more marginalized and disadvantaged situations to deal with the situation and recover. So we see, as community psychologists, we see health and well-being as closely linked to issues of social inequality. And so we think it's really important now to focus on how we can improve the quality of life and living conditions of marginalized groups and communities. And so we thought that this roundtable as an opportunity to share some and thoughts with people who we know have been involved in the front line and have been doing a lot of work in this field. So thank you, and I will hand over to our first speaker, Professor Emeritus Community Social Psychology at the Manchester Metropolitan University, where she has also been for some years the director of the Research Institute for Health and Social Change. She has been working extensively on the issues of social inequalities and marginalization. And so we are very happy to have you here, Caroline, and hear your thoughts about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I'm just trying to see why this won't let me share my slides.
If you want, I can share slides.
Can you see those?
Not yet. Not yet.
Well, go on then. You share my slides.
Okay, I can share your slides. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So if you share them, Martina, can I move them on?
I'm sorry, but I think I can only move them. So just tell me when you want to move your slide.
Okay. Well, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to look back at the something's gone funny with my screen here. I'm going to look back at the values that underpin community psychology. I'm going to talk in particular about the response, the political response that there's been to COVID in the UK. And I think that will be generalizable to other places, even if the specifics are different. And then I'm going to look at what the implications might hold then for the future for community psychology. So thank you, Martina. I could have the next slide. Okay, one commentator in the UK wrote in October, if you are not incandescent with rage, you haven't grasped the scale of what's been done to us. Now, he's not talking about the pandemic. He's talking about the response to the pandemic. And he goes on to say that the UK government has bypassed the lean and efficient health service to create an outsourced, privatised system characterised by incompetence and failure. The system's waste is measured not just in pounds, but in human lives. It's measured in mass unemployment, economic crisis, grief, isolation, long-term illness, and avoidable death. So thank you, Martina. So what has been done to us? Well, I'm going to look at, firstly, European values. I'm going to look at the rule of law, democracy, human dignity, and human rights. So the rule of law in the UK has just about been upheld. However, where it's been evoked in response to the crisis, it's been evoked unevenly. Particular groups, particularly young people and young black people, have been victimised. Sanctions have been brought to bear unequally across society for breaches of rules that have not been set with popular support. It could be argued that the mutual support and neighbourhood responses are democratic responses, but I think we have to ask who's not excluded in those. And we have to understand that self-appointed community coordinators have no decision-making legitimacy, which poses a problem for community psychology if we want to build on the strengths of local community responses. Moving on to democracy then, there have been choices throughout between the right, oh sorry, that's the wrong one, virtually no democratic involvement in the UK. Indeed, it was only midway through the crisis that our government permitted parliamentary scrutiny of their plans. But even then, it refused virtual attendance to the Houses of Parliament and virtual voting. Human rights then. Thanks. Next one. Thanks. So throughout then, there have been choices made between the right to life, the right to family life, rights to livelihoods, rights to big business and commerce. Even when on the surface it looks as if the right to life is being considered first and foremost, in the UK there actually has been no concerted attempt to frame the collective saving of lives as the most fundamental response to the pandemic. Instead, the focus has been on saving the NHS and saving the economy. Of course, saving the health service and saving the economy might well help protect people's rights. But it's now becoming clear that those who are to pay literally the price for the government's response to the pandemic will be the poor, especially those in frontline services for whom a pay freeze has just been announced. It's quite clear from all we know about the inequalities exposed by COVID-19 that not everyone's rights are being protected equally. The rights, for example, of migrants, prisoners, children, women have been subjugated to wider political agendas. Thank you. Next one. Human dignity. Now we get to some of the most appalling aspects of the response to COVID. In particular, I'm thinking of the elderly in our care homes who are denied visitors, their families and carers who are denied visiting, the people who die alone, the children confined with abusive parents, those who have lost their livelihoods and their homes. But I'm also thinking of the health and social care workers who have to try and attend to people who are sick and dying without the equipment they need to express full compassion. There is no dignity in living in danger, without food, without a home, without a job. The practice of assigning those clinically most vulnerable to longer and deeper confinement both recognises the risks posed by the virus, but poses at the same time the problem that it renders this group of people as responsible for others' privations. Okay, let's move on then to look at community psychology values. Those that I've just discussed are European values. So these are community psychology values, and they're the ones that we underpin our community psychological practice in Manchester in the UK. So the first is social justice. As we've seen, the response to COVID has in no way treated people equally and fairly. In the UK, resources have been allocated to private companies instead of public services. Those on the lowest pay and the most precarious work have been the essential workers on whom we've all relied. And employment support has failed to protect them. Claims for basic welfare have doubled since March, and the unemployment in some areas is nearing 10%, and for some groups it's far higher than that. There has been a very slow recognition that the majority of those working directly with people affected by COVID are women, and so indeed are the majority of the community mutual aid coordinators, and that many women too have suffered from home working alongside childcare, and not only extensive abuse within families, but also within the family court system, which has been operating remotely in ways that exclude many people. The COVID-19 response has been gender blind. Furthermore, in the UK, 6 out of every 10 deaths between March and October were of disabled people. It is not justice that information is promulgated primarily electronically, and some people are not digitally literate, and others have to choose between buying data and buying food. It is not justice that the response to the pandemic has furthered the erosion of democratic processes and public services. Thank you. Next one. Stewardship as a value. Everything about the pandemic reveals the long-standing failure of good stewardship. Factory farming and the degradation of the environment and of biodiversity has led to the chances of zoonotic transmission as habitats are eroded, and particularly small mammals come ever more closely in contact with humans. This was a major factor in the appearance of COVID-19. One consequence of the pandemic and its lockdown is the very rapid decrease in carbon emissions, nearly everywhere, meaning the air in the cities is cleaner and health has been improved for many people, and people heard birds singing. However, this is likely to be temporary unless measures are brought in for meaningful and impactful green recovery very quickly. This will involve measures to curb high-emitting businesses and travel and not restore to previous levels, despite the lobbies from those industries. What all this does tell us, though, is that carbon reduction is possible if there is a political will. Most crucially and related to COVID-19, the loss of life is an assault on stewardship. Thank you. The value of community. Networks within local communities in many places have been strengthened through the unsurprising and rapid mutual aid. There's been an increase in volunteering, as there always is in an emergency. For us, this was at local and authority levels, despite our government's attempts even to centralise volunteering. Help, however, tended to be within social groups and not across the social schisms that are long-standing, though there is a more nuanced picture to this, and it did vary in different places. The growth of neighbourliness is, of course, good. However, not everyone by any means can volunteer, nor can they benefit from volunteering. And the levels of isolation and despair, particularly among young people, are shocking. Culture has taken a knock, not just the closing of cultural venues and activities, but the prohibitions on, for example, religious and cultural festivals, culturally important funeral, marriage, and anniversary customs and practices. Thank you. So we can see that certainly the response of our government has violated both European and community psychology values. The chances of promoting collective action on inequalities have been lost. We can't ignore, the role that capital and capitalism has played. Business as usual in terms of maximising profits for the few has underlined many of these value violations. We've seen this in the procurement and protective equipment, the contracting of public health outcomes to private security firms rather than public health departments, the income precarity of frontline workers, the unequal danger to future prospects of families, and now the potential patenting of vaccines that should be available to all. If these things were happening in countries of the global south, they would be called out as autocratic, demagogic, and corrupt. This and the climate emergency have been exposed in different ways by the pandemic, and we'll have to frame our priorities for the future. Next, please. In the British Psychological Society in the UK, we have a working group at the moment that's looking at community action and resilience. And the working definition of that is overcoming adversity whilst also potentially changing or even dramatically transforming aspects of that adversity. Whilst community responses to COVID-19 may be helping people overcome adversity, the task ahead will be to work with people to bring about change and even dramatically transform the causes of those adversities. These adversities are based on deep inequalities that precede COVID, but have now been revealed for all to see. Thank you. Next one. So many things have been different through the pandemic. Couple this with other things that have been happening worldwide, such as youth climate action, Extinction Rebellion climate action, Black Lives Matter protests, street protests in Chile and Hong Kong, then we perhaps are in unprecedented times, not just because of the pandemic. Next, please. We could be in what Ulrich Beck calls a process of metamorphosis of the world. He says that metamorphosis implies the much more radical transformation in which old certainties of modern society are falling away and something quite new is emerging. To grasp this metamorphosis of the world, it is necessary to explore new beginnings, to focus on what is emerging from the old, and to grasp future structures and norms in the turmoil of the present. Next, please. Everything is indeed in turmoil just now, and new ways of relating to each other have been created. We don't quite know what will emerge, but the challenge is for us to try to seize opportunities wherever they arise and try to ensure that a better world emerges. For community psychology, the challenge is to harness some of the things that have been happening at community level, to politicize them, in order to enable people to play their part in wider social transformation, if we're to realise the values that we hold dear. In the case of COVID-19, this will be to weaken the grip of capital, promote climate and environmental action and justice, and to reduce inequalities. What would it take? Well, this is a short list. Firstly, we must reassert our values. Secondly, we must abandon simplistic, hierarchical systems models of understanding human experience and possibilities for change in favour of more complex systems thinking, drawing ideas and models from a much wider range of different fields. Secondly, we must take seriously decoloniality and the search for epistemic justice, and find ways of recognising different cultural knowledges and value bases. Thirdly, we must unpack the concept of solidarity so as to move beyond the boundaries of community psychological thinking, understanding and practice. Fourthly, we should organise internationally across both discipline and professional boundaries and work part of wider social movements, not confining ourselves to community psychology. Above all, we need to employ methods of critical and political consciousness raising in order to harness local networks and energies for transformational change. If we don't do some of these things, then I think we will have to abandon any ambition for transformational change and confine ourselves to working with others to improve livability at local levels. Maybe this is enough for community psychology. Next, please. Does it go down a bit further? Well, that slide hasn't loaded. Whichever way we go, we need to work with others to make hope practical rather than despair convincing, in the words of the famous culture Raymond Williams. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for this really insightful presentation. I think, I don't know, you raised a lot of very important issues, and there are a lot of things now coming up in my mind, but I will keep them for now, and since we will have the debate at the end of the session. So thank you, and I will hand over to our second speaker, and which I think it's very much, whose work is very much also connected to what Caroline was saying and highlighting. And so I'm very happy to have here with us Professor José Ornelas, who is the director of the Applied Psychology Research Center, Capabilities and Inclusion of the University Institute ECPA of Lisbon. He has been working for several years or decades now in the field of mental health, community mental health, transformative mental health, and also with the issue of homelessness more recently with a very important program, Housing First, in Portugal. So I will hand over to Professor Ornelas, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you, Francesca, and my colleagues, Carolyn and Fortuna. Hi. And thank you very much, and all the people that are listening us to say hello. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about one issue that has been one of my main interests during all this 3 decades or more in the area of mental health. It's I can say, somehow the origins of community psychology in certain way, because the institutionalization in the 60s, it was one main idea that the community psychology to resolve the challenges of the institutionalization. So the institutionalization means very simply that instead of large, big institutions, we should go more personalized, individualized, and integrate people in the community. Mainly the founders of community psychology in the 65, they were very much involved in the mental health, the institutionalization. So criticizing and helping to close down the psychiatric hospitals. And we did some good work, but we have to analyze what happened during this three or four decades. That with the pandemic, everything came to the surface about the institutionalization. And we realized that we have to be very concerned with the situation. What we saw with this pandemic, we saw that the elderly people, the most old people, they are in most countries. I am not saying all countries, but most countries, particularly in my country. I'm going to talk a little bit what I have been living and seeing in my country, but this is transversal in European Union and North America. One of the main issues this pandemic brought out for me, it's the ageism towards the elderly. It's unbelievable what they have been through. Firstly, we realized that most of the very old people, they are concentrate and segregate in large, big nurseries. And they start dying. The first that they start dying with this pandemic, they said that was because of the age. But it's not my opinion. It's not only the age. It's the concentration that they are living. Large. For example, in Portugal, we discovered, we didn't know, we have nurseries with 300 people, 300 old people concentrate in the same nursery. And it's why they get contaminated, because they were concentrated. And the virus starts spreading in those large, first it was the nursery. Second, it was the psychiatric hospitals here in Portugal and many other countries, because many psychiatric hospitals that still exist, they are concentrated. And the other group, it was the disabled that are still very concentrated, and youth and children abandoned by the families. I know in England you already have the foster homes very spread, but in many other countries of the Union we still have, for example, in my country we have 8,000 children and youth institutionalized, and they also have very much been contaminated. So this is something serious, and community psychologists should do to think and to discuss this. In the first place, for the elderly, because we have experience, we have alternatives. We have been working very much. The elderly should live in the community. This Alzheimer theory that it was diagnosed in most elderly. In my opinion, it's the scientific way of segregating the elderly. You know, all of them, they have Alzheimer now, or Parkinson, but Alzheimer is the most diagnosis that the elderly has at this moment, that justify that with the Alzheimer, the elders, the old people cannot be treated in the community or by the family or by some people to care for them because they need to be institutionalized, and it's not true. Alzheimer can be treated and support in the community. So I propose a discussion, community psychology field, and I'm trying to spread this discussing. Now, I raise a problem, institutionalization that we are observing, and I propose an alternative, using this pandemic and this reality to discuss again that we have to deinstitutionalize all these groups. The elderly in first place, because the ageism around this, you know, even in some countries, in my country, for example, they were discussing if the vaccine will be for the elderly after 75 years old. Now we are correcting, the government's correcting this, what they said, but they said it was not a priority. Now some countries it's including, but we have to be very careful about this situation. So to discuss the role of the elders, the role of the being part of the community. Our civilization and our communities needs to have contacts with the elders, not only the children with the grandparents, it's all the community. They have to be inside of the community. So let's deinstitutionalize the nurseries during the pandemic and after the pandemic. And let's move the money, the finance that the governments put in those nurseries towards supporting them in their houses, in more individualized and local and neighbor communities with professionals, with we call here caring people that are being paid for that. It's now a new law that we have, but in all the union we have different names. So it's very important. The other things, it's to use this situation to deinstitutionalize the psychiatric hospitals that still exist in many countries. Do not correct the institutionalization of the mental health system in many countries, like in mine and Italy and Spain, like it's creating group homes in the community. Group homes are not ecologically adapted and sustainable because they are groups concentrated. Now I have been talking about this, about realizing and being groups, and now there is this pandemic thing that helps us to discuss. What is the difference? For me, there is no big difference to be a psychiatric hospitals with 200 people or be a group homes with 20 or 30 people. There is no difference in terms of personal life, in terms of personal realization. It's why Francesca said, and also about disabled people. Disabled people, people with disabilities, mental and physical disabilities, they are still very segregated in many countries in the Union. Segregate because of, for example, people with Down syndrome, they are still living in group homes and large group homes with mental disabilities. And with the mental health, it's the disaster of the institutionalization for the last 40 years, that it was moving. It's what we call trans-institutionalization. They move from large psychiatric to other big institutions in the community, like group homes, cooperatives, working, concentrate people, and school, artificial school separate of other people. So now it's a great opportunity for us to discuss again the origins of community psychology, the values. We discovered all the community values because of the institutionalization. And now we can use again our principles and values of the Swampscott Conference, and again, struggle for the institutionalization of the elderly and other groups. And we have a good proposal that Francesca mentioned. We have been working for the last decade with homelessness people that have been very concentrated in shelters. Shelters. Here is transversal, including England. Maybe in foster homes are not the same like in my country, but in terms of shelters, we are all the same. Big shelters for homelessness. And we have been working in housing first, and has been working very well. People moving directly, on the contrary of the theory behaviorists and cognitivists that said that people need to learn by step, like a stair model, to learn competencies, skills in order to move to a house. We have been demonstrating that it's not true. They can move directly from the streets to individualized house. And now we have been in Europe, we have almost thousands of homelessness people already that moved to houses. We have a large project that we study this group. And it's amazing, before of the pandemic, they keep their houses, they are more integrated, they are more recovered, they are more participative in their communities. And amazing, now we are studying the 400 people that are living in their individualized house here in Lisbon, and they are very much well protected, ecologically protected of the virus. There is no many cases. They are very, instead of, contrary of the shelters, of large group homes. They are more living in the community, more protect. It's easy for them to use the rules, the protection rules like masks and distancing. So this is more ecological solutions. And it's a good example that we should generalize for other people, for the elderly, for the disabled, for the children, for the youth. People should move into the community individualizedly. And just to finalize my discussion proposal, just to say the Parliament, the European Parliament, last week made a decision about housing first to take out of the streets 700,000 homelessness people in the next few years. So this is a good hope during the pandemic. It was a good decision. And through housing first, they said 700,000 in European Union through housing first. Let me say some concerns about mental health and the vaccine. This is a little more polemic, but let me say some concerns that I have. This genetic manipulation thing is something the scientists already have a long time ago in their research, but they were never allowed to implement the genetic manipulation. Now, because of this crisis, they are deciding today, probably they are going to approve the genetic manipulation. But let me just to express some concerns. I would like to discuss this institutionalization, but because the mental health, it's the next step that they are going to have, the manipulation of like a vaccine to manipulate depression or to manipulate schizophrenia, that they have been thinking along for decades how to manipulate genetically the schizophrenia. After the lobotomy, it was to next step is going to be the genetic manipulation. Just to express some concerns about this, I'm not discussing the vaccine for virus, but what is going to happen next, and be aware that the mental health is going to be the next step of the genetic manipulation. That's for now, that's all that I have to say.
Thank you very much, Professor Ornelas, and for this very important and powerful intervention that challenge us, push us to again to put at the center of this reflection today the very important issue of institutionalization. And as you were mentioning, giving a lot of examples, I will also add migrant institutionalization, because we are detaining migrants in detention centers, again, total institutions, people who are in other overcrowded prisons. So there is a lot to really reflect on this. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Francesca, I didn't mention the refugees, but I can include them. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Exactly, it's what I was thinking during your intervention. Yeah, because we are doing that, in Italy, Portugal, everywhere. So I will hand over to our last but not least speaker for today, who is Professor Fortuna Procentese. And Fortuna is currently an associate professor of social and community psychology at the Department of Humanities at the University of Naples, where she is also the director of a postgraduate course on psychology of the emergencies and how to develop resilient communities. And she is, as I said before, a member of the executive committee of the ECPA and also the Italian Society for Social Psychology. And so I will hand over to her. Thank you, Fortuna, for being here with us.
Okay. Thank you for this space and for a very interesting discussion. I think it's a very hard work for us to cope with the challenges. And my colleagues, Carolina and José, discussing about the principal aspect of the community psychology, value, and I think this aspect about institutional and the action don't develop this value, I think is in a principal attention for us. I think this presentation to think about this aspect, and I think the community psychology across always about challenges. In different cases, we have the change for social context, political context. Is very for us even a bit to cope with these challenges, but it's very complicated. I think in this case is a very big challenges for us, and we need to work together to cope with this aspect, because we have a need, I think, to identify the physical and symbolic space where forms of individual and collective recognize. I think this is important, because the people, the citizens, the different community have a need to recognize yourself, your value, your power, because sometimes in this context we lost the attention about this. This attention is not only for the professional or academic or association in particular, but I think we have to work to recognize the collectivity and the citizen to have to work together with us in this direction. We have to construction together this reality. I think the principal challenges another challenge we have to put together different vision, different part of this society. It's very complicated for us to speak, to work together always in a way, sustainability way to change some aspects, some problem. In this case, we have this, I underline this characterized in our society because we have this investment of the community, of the belonging, and the collective action within. I think this is an aspect very important because it characterizes our society, the citizen, the perspective of the citizen is not the same perspective we have, and is very different. I think the people have an attention in this context, develop the value for yourself, not for work together. And in this aspect, more improve the inequality among citizens through in creative, generative social ties. And you sent me, okay. And the capitalists don't help us because which have effect on in individual and collective responsibility in processes and engage for oneself and for the community, in community where the development at last. This is the scenario we have, global scenario. Carolyn describe very well the value is difficult to impact in this aspect, inequality system in different level, and we have to try to this aspect more stressful in this case with in pandemic situation because we point out this pandemic point out the problem, the before the existent before the problem, and now we have the more exponential problem. Service is no good, different service, education have the problem. We have structural, cultural, very different problem. And you don't have answer, adaptive answer, a good answer for people. We in various studies underlined in literature, in different articles in this way, underlined the response, individual response, and underlined anxiety, depression. It is very increased because the isolation, that actual condition have more impact of this situation because before the society is improve the isolamento. The people stay alone, more alone for yourself, for your things, and non sharing our opinion. Is very complicated to work in this condition, and more. This pandemic have characterized this respect other emergency because attack by a common and indiscriminating enemy. And this virus share by human to human transmission. It is very, I think is important because this is characterized of this emergence attack the system, the relation system, attack the vision of the other people. It is a very big effect on the means of the relationship. We have to work in paradoxical situation to implement preventive behavior, social participation, because if you want controlling this pandemic and this don't develop again, we have to work to responsibilize the citizen community. It is more important to work about our value, the community psychology value. Because it is only, I think, this, the unique solution to collaborate together in this situation. And we have here different effect. We have a special observatory about my master in psychology of the emergency, with the group to work together and observe. I have an observatory, specific observatory. We try different answer of the people in different social levels, because it's very is really we have this difficulty, but in the first phase of this emergency, we have the more involved people in flash mob, in support, reciprocal support, in discover our community, but at the same time we have the very disequality for the support, material support, economic level. In this case, some people to organize the group to give the social support, but is and Carolyn said before, in this case we have the more involved in the first phase of the emergency, and this is usually, but in this emergency we have a long time the emergency. It is very different for the other situation, and we have the long time. In different time we don't have the only solidarity and social support, but we have the hungry, we have the crisis of the people, and more discharge, psychological and material and economic discharge. I very believe in this in developing sense of responsibility together. I work in this direction a long time, and this because if we have a need to change the value of the community, but step to step, in different way, put together to work in this direction. The sense of responsibility together, we refer to represent to individual and social processes enacted in the community member in their community of belonging, which shape our daily life together within. In this case, we have not only the feeling for our community belong sense, but we have the responsibility, we have the style of the people stay together. I think it's very complicated to develop this aspect, but to try in different steps to develop this aspect. I think I have to work hard for this. But the people have a need to improve the respect for the others, and José underlined this aspect in different way, in different situation. But this is very important to include other in our life. Is more include the people and compare different opinion, different vision, but not have the issue in conflictuality, negative conflictuality. My negotiation, to involve the negotiation, to involve the people to stay together in a different way, in this case, we accept the difference. Is non-developed discrimination. I think it's important support for the institutional reference. In this way is very, very, very important, because our action in community psychology is not have for sustainability if we don't speak with the institution, we don't have the power, and the citizen in this direction, we have to create the possibility to speak, to compare with institution. I think this power have two of the citizen, not for professional or the other people. Sometimes we try in our community have the intermediate group for the municipality, and the citizen part of this group of municipality speak with reference, institutional reference, and in this way we have the possibility to compare, not directly, but we in big city we have the possibility to speak and compare with the reference, institutional reference. We have to improve the freedom of opinion. We have this very example in different way. We have the American user, American in different, in Italy, we have a different expression, the no freedom of opinion. And we have to work very hard to don't have this situation for different problem. I think the people have needed the feeling activity member of the community, have the real support of the community members, not only for macro system, but I think we have to work in territorial community to develop the support for each community. In this pandemic, for example, more young people discover our community, because sometimes the neighborhood don't know. In this situation for lockdown, some young people, you say, it's very surprised to discover some part of our community. And this, I think, is important, because this is to create the belonging and the opportunity to share in a neighborhood, in habit, in the condominium building, because we have different expression to support in this period to give the different support each habitant, each citizen. I think another aspect, the rules. Sometimes we have the context, the social context, where the rules is not very clear, and the people don't have the clear idea, and sometimes these have an effect, because the people try to understand with the shows the feminism and no clear rules. It's a very danger, because sometimes the people try other reference, no institutional, non just reference, but other reference support your life. For example, the criminal, for example, the non-clear regular activity. Another aspect is equality. You told before, Carolyn and José. I think it's important to give the people the power, because the power is very, I have a negative representation of the people, but we have to recognize the capacity of the people, the possibility to change something, because sometimes this society, the people have the idea, the third people, governance, management, your life. It's not correct. We have to go the way to recognize self-esteem, auto-efficacy, empowerment for the people. You trade space to reinforce this aspect. All these aspects, we have to work to give the still of sense of responsibility, togetherness in this way. We try in different moment of this emergency. I have a different experience. We show very briefly with you, and we have to create with the unit of psychological emergencies about the group work in master with us. We created a space, different space, because the distance to create more difficult for us to work. And you create the different space, online space, because I think it's important to have the possibility to people to have the contact with each other, and by phone, by email. We created the space, the Facebook space. We have here this link. We listen to citizen needs, support them, and contain their emotional expression. I think is important because sometimes these emergencies, in a specific strategy used people is express the emotional, to recognize our emotional, to recognize the relationship, intimate relationship, when this way is good, because we have another effect of this pandemic to stress the difficult situation that exists before this, because we have high level of violence where before existed this problem. We are high level of conflictuality. And in this case, we have difficulty and to or voluntary with the violence center to compare the difficulty to work in this by distance with the other people. We have a different following. Here we take a brief the brief follower for Facebook. We have a lot of women, a part of the woman, but I think this space in social network is important because we have not only Italian people, but the other nationality. We stay here is a very low part, but I think it's a good system to stay together in like us now. Another part, I think, to try to take the contact with the people is an experience with the other university colleagues of community psychology in Italy. If you to try to follow this way to express the our things, we give the space to contain the emotional, negative emotion, or express positive emotional. In this case, we ask the photo and the diario to write in the first week of the lockdown and the last week of the lockdown. And we underline with these students work with us to support for in this moment and to work together to try the possibility to give support in their community. This student is very interesting because develop a different project of solidarity of about the different district in our city. This is a photo of this in mail and we represent the first moment the people discover the PH passion and try the strategy to cope with this situation. And this is only some work developed together with the community psychology university colleagues. It's very important because this pandemic is very take together in on these to cope with these challenges, for understand what's happened, describe, and to try these different way to for develop the belonging. Don't stay alone, lasciare da soli, leave alone the people. I think is important this aspect, diciamo this aspect to involve and develop the fifth step, the eighth step, to develop the sense of responsibility, togetherness. Thanks for your attention. I hope in future discussion about challenge for community psychology. Thanks very much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Fortuna, for this presentation and for sharing about your important work in this period, work of research and reflection and intervention also. I think we can now open for discussion, for Q&A. And so I'm happy to hear, I mean, I have also some questions, but maybe I'll first let the audience ask their questions and share the comments and anything they feel like. So I don't think we have a chat, or at least I don't have a chat. So maybe you can raise your hand. I think there is this function on the top of the screen of the platform. You can see a hand, and it means raising your hand, or you can just, you know, unmute yourself and put your video on so that you can speak with the speakers.
Maybe I would like to ask something.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
I'm trying to turn on my camera. Okay, so I would like to ask of the guests or speakers about what do you think about definition on some constructs. For example, I spoke about sense of belonging, and the most important part of this is belonging to place. And now in this pandemic situation and immigration situation, the place is not so available, let's say. So how to work with belongingness, for example, to count on with the place, or to try find some different aspects of the belongingness construct.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And so I will, Lisa, I think was the name. Lisa, is it correct?
Elena Lisa.
Okay, Elena Lisa, sorry, thank you. And she was asking about the notion of sense of belonging, and she was observing that usually when we speak about sense of belonging, it's very also connected to the idea of a place or your where you are situated, like your community where you are living in. And so in this moment, she was saying the place, this idea of place, it's not so available. I mean, we are, of course, all in a situation of confinement. I mean, so all this situation has been affecting this idea and this sense of belonging to a place, and so how we can rethink the sense of belonging in these current circumstances, I could say. Yes. You can start as you prefer. You have Professor Ornelas. You have to unmute yourself, please.
Sorry. Let's just say, because of my topic, when I discuss my topic of the institutionalization and housing first, people raises very much this topic of belonging, isolation, solitude, and for me, belonging should be to belong to a community, a normal community, a neighborhood, a normal neighborhood. Because people say, oh, but when they live in a group homes, for example, they belong to a community of a group home. But that, for me, it's an artificial neighborhood. The real neighborhood is where we live, where we belong, ourselves, we professors or students, in a street, in a school, in a working place. This is where we should belong. And when we talk about housing first, people live in their individualized house. People ask very much, but they are not isolated, or they don't feel isolation. No, because they belong to a community. They have many neighbors, normal neighbors. So to belong for me should be to belong a normal community. Other day, someone asked me, there is in Paris, near Paris, a community of people with Alzheimer's, 100 people that support each other. What I thought about it, and I said, no, it's not my perspective. My perspective should, people with Alzheimer's should be in the normal communities, for us to be in contact with them and them contact with us, and not isolate, not only in nurseries, not only in communities, artificial communities only for them. That it's not belonging. It's belonging to an artificial community.
Thank you, Professor Ornelas. Yeah, please, Caroline.
I think we've got a series of paradoxes, because for some people, experience of the pandemic has given them a much greater sense of belonging. It's given them a much greater sense of common identity, particularly with neighbours, if not with a neighbourhood. At the same time, there are people who are completely isolated and have no contact and have been told they shouldn't leave their houses. At the same time, more than probably any lifetime, the rest of the world is visible to us in the sense of being affected by the same virus. So there's a sense of commonality and of belonging and of responsible belonging that extends beyond the neighbourhood. So I think, I'm not sure that my thinking would be, it's not that people don't have a place anymore, because they do have a place, and if their neighbourhood has a name, a lot of the interactions such as they've been have used the name, which concretes a sense of belonging and identity with the neighbourhood. But what's been missing is the face-to-face discussions, is the face-to-face meetings and encounters that contribute to a sense of belonging, and particularly that notion of the strength of weak ties. So not the friendships and the relationships and the groups to which one belongs, but the acquaintances that one sees every day walking around the neighbourhood. But at the same time, in the UK, all the way through, even with the most sincere lockdown, the most extreme lockdown, people were allowed to go outside to exercise. And so they have encountered people who are going out in their neighbourhood to exercise for half an hour, so you couldn't go very far, half an hour's exercise. They encounter people they've never seen before, and they encounter goodness knows how they've never seen before. There seem to be more dogs than people, but there's a kind of a reconfiguration about what that identity and belonging means, but not for everyone and not just confined to the neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you for this interesting comment, Caroline. I don't know if Fortuna want to add something.
No, I think my colleague expressed very clearly this aspect. The belonging is very basic, I think, sense, feeling. Whether our city, our groups, our organization, for us is a very expression to feel together and stay together and have the support of the people and the possibility to express yourself in very various situations. Okay, sorry, what's happening?
Francesca, can I add something a little briefly? Very briefly. And in our experience of housing first, we have studying, researching the way that the team should work, the ecological team, and how the team should work in order to increase and to build belongingness, to the sense of belonging and the sense of community participation. This team, we call the ecological and collaborative team, facilitates the of people, elderly or mentally ill or disabled, between the person and the community in order to build the bridging and belonging and to create this. It's something we have been studying and researching this new way of working. Instead of being clinical, individualized, it's facilitating the contacts and the relationships in the community.
I think just building on that, José, the way in which communities build and belonging builds and sense of responsible togetherness builds is through activity. And that's one of the things that's not been possible. So the activity has been certainly kind of in the areas in which I'm connected. The activity is all in planning. It's all in planning what could be done next. And that's a very different way to bring people together. We've yet to see whether that actually lasts. Direct activity, there's not a change in relationships.
Thank you for your answers and these reflections. I don't know if there are other comments or questions from the audience.
Can I add something? Hi. So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's really a question, but I was very much interested on the intersections and how to build a movement that address all the challenges that we have, and at the same time that is a movement that builds dialogue with other disciplines. And I wonder if you have practical tools to how to do this and how to start or to restart this conversation and movement.
Thank you, Maria. And yeah, and I think I'll add to your question because it's very much related to what I was also I was gonna ask, which is about how how we can, of course, move forward, and also how can we deal with this tension that I think all the speakers have very well described, between, on one side, having to kind of try to reduce the impacts of COVID, and so like working in order to, as Carolyn was saying, to improve the livelihood of communities and trying to, you know, to reduce the impact of what is happening, of the pandemic. And on the other side, like trying to address more structural issues. And so the causes, the roots of what we are witnessing now. And so how we can also, I mean, deal with this tension, and so navigate this tension in what we have to do next.
So just add on that, because I was thinking that, and even the roundtable from yesterday is very much about values and what's the values that community psychologists should promote, but that it's very difficult to move from values to action, and I would like to see more conversations on exactly how we can achieve the values that we discuss so much. So if you have practical tools for that, I will really appreciate.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Carolyn, with this big challenge. You have, sorry, to unmute yourself. We are not hearing you.
I said I've got an easy answer to all of this, but of course I haven't. But I think one of the things, very easy to say, we hold a particular set of values. But then I think one of the things to do is to be asking ourselves, what do we do with those values? And what I think is one of the useful things to do is to use them to interrogate everything we do. So we use them to say, okay, our next project that we're engaging in, or our next conversation we're having with a group or a community, to what extent does what we're doing and how we're doing it reflect those values, and become aware of what is it that we're compromising on and why. It won't always be possible to do everything according to all of the values that we profess to hold. I think we owe it to the people that we work with to be really clear when we're deviating from them and why. And if we haven't got a good answer to that, then we don't do it. We find another course of action. We find another way of working. But having said that, of course, there are enormous pressures if we're working in institutions, in universities, or in public services, or in private clinics, or wherever. We have pressures from those institutions that require us to develop projects, or to finish projects sometimes before we think we should, or to publish work that the people we work with don't see any value in publishing. All of those things require compromise. So I don't think we should be too purist about and claim that we always work to all of our values, but use them to interrogate our practice. On the second issue, on movement building, I don't think we have to start from scratch. If we're thinking, for me, COVID is a way of exposing the inequality and disadvantages and inequities that exist. Now, of course, there's some very, very specific outcomes of COVID that are terrible, the illness and the death in particular. But those social fractures and those social skins that are revealed through COVID are there before COVID and will stay there after COVID. And I think what I was suggesting that in my talk is that we have three really strong imperatives. One is capital and the way that capital is working, and that will work in different places, differently in different places. One is the climate emergency, and cutting across both those things are inequalities. There are already social movements on all those things, but community psychology is not visible within them. I don't think we should be thinking of starting afresh. I think we should be joining forces and showing global inequality movements that a community psychological dimension has something to offer, showing the climate action movements that community psychology has something to offer. Then, of course, we've got to be really clear, what has it got to offer? And that's another challenge altogether.
Thank you, Caroline.
Can I-
Professor Ornelas? Yeah,
Just
go ahead.
about movement. With the pandemic, there is many talks about mental illness and the impact in the mental health of people. And it's interesting to follow the movement of with experience of mental illness, really with long experience, because they lived through confinements in many times of their lives in psychiatric hospitals, and they have demonstrated a lot of resistance towards this pandemic. They have not been very much in breakdowns because they are aware of the risk of going back to the hospitals. And we are studying the way that they are empowering themselves and other people, helping people to understand what is mental illness and to how to manage and how to see the difference between the impact of the COVID that we relate with anxiety and really mental illness, and how to deal. So they have leading a process of helping other people and empowering themselves. For example, the family members, they are and what we have been doing with them is they are having a course of leadership to have leadership skills in order to get stronger and to create an international network of people with experience of mental illness to deal better with this situation and to get prepared for the next steps after the pandemic, particularly about the vaccines that I mentioned.
Thank you. I think it's particularly interesting.
I've got something to add to that, because I think that's one of the, from what José said, one of the roles.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, now it's better.
Is that better?
Yeah,
it's better.
It's one of the roles that community psychology can play, is helping people in however they identify. And to join with other people internationally with similar life experiences.
Caroline, can you just repeat the last sentence, because I think I personally lost you.
Where did you get up to? Community psychology has a role in working with people to develop their capabilities and competencies and strategies to work collectively together and to link internationally with people who have common interests, which is the foundation of movement building.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important what you both said, Caroline and also José, because I think reminds us also of how much we can learn also from these marginalized groups, and especially in moments of crisis as we are living now. And so I think it's really an important insight in order also to a bit challenge the idea that we have just to help them, but we can be helped and learn from them a lot. So I think it's particularly important. I don't know if Fortuna want to add something.
Actually, but I think we have worked together for to do an effort to consent our value, our work inside in the life of the people, but more in the institutional, because sometimes our work is not recognized for the institutional person. I don't know in our country, but I think in this pandemic have an effect of the work of psychology because the people discover the psychology. Okay, it's a good, it's a great, but in sometimes non in our way, for only for the support, clinical support, emotional support, counseling, but not in for our work, for the develop the group, the community, and our value or our intervention, our action. I think we have to work more to create this connection, to know our work, institutional people, and not only work inside our community, because we have more strong, more clear to communicate for communication outside us, because I think it's important, and the people don't say me, you are sociology. No, I community psychology, and don't understand in brief time my work. I have a lot of time to understand what's happened, work with me or with other people, have this approach. I think it's very, very challenging for us, and because the value we develop in this sense, because in this sense we have the supportive or the support our I don't know in English, ordine degli psicologi in Italy, work to create a space for the unit social psychology for the emergency in different community, work to create a space for the education community. I think is a very challenge, but with our work we try and have a good position for our colleagues, and I think it is very important this for me, for to develop our discipline, our vision, our values. Yes, it is very important. It is the discourse in the sense of responsibility, togetherness, in this sense. It is not for us, but for all. Okay, it's a long way to have a lot of work to do together.
Francesca, can I comment what something that Fortuna? My suggestion is for to help people not making confusion with us, community psychologists and sociologists. It's to emphasize the role of what we do in this psychological way. Sometimes we hide the psychological part of our work, and we have to say, see how our political activism has a strong impact in psychological person, how this work that we are doing, housing force, is so important in the psychological within conflicts of a person. Sometimes, because of the history of community psychology, we ran away of this part of the psychological part, and we put the psychological part in charge for the clinicians or psychiatrists. But we have, at this moment, I'm very interested to see the relationships of the social impact in the psychological well-being.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very important.
Yes, of course.
I think in some places that's going to be a really hard struggle, José, because as soon as you talk about psychological well-being, it goes into the mental health bucket. And that brings in the clinical approach and so on.
Yeah.
So to be able to demonstrate, and I think there's some ways are beginning to demonstrate that things other than mental health interventions actually contribute to psychological well-being.
Yeah, and I think it's a really challenging area, field of study that we really need to think how to develop, how to invest more in this part. Also at the level of research, those of us who are, engaging in research, I think it's really important to look at that.
Particularly at the moment, there's some really interesting discourses going on, competing discourses. One about the mental health consequences of COVID, and so the need for more therapists, and one about there is nothing surprising about being anxious and fearful in the context of COVID. That is not a mental health condition. And those two approaches in public discourse are kind of in conflict.
Yeah, and also I think all your presentations well highlighted how we also as community psychologists look at the social and political structural dimension that determine determine the feeling of being unwell, of the distress, or how we want to call that, the suffering. It's not just a matter of individuals who are not functioning well, who have problems. That is a matter of our societies distribute resources, of the social policies that are put in place, of the distribution and access to rights, to resources. And I think this is really an important field of study we have to really focus on, because maybe we could, I don't know if we could have avoided COVID, but maybe we could have had less harmful impacts if we had better social healthcare policies, policies to support the most marginalized. And so I think we really have to do a lot of work on this. I don't know if there are more comments and questions.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I have a question. What do you think? Is it possible to find some solution for COVID problems in our neighborhood? I would say like fostering or improve a sense of belonging, a sense of community among our neighbors. Some practical tools, I hope it was clear.
Did you understand the question, all of
Yeah.
you? Can you, Caroline, not? Can you repeat briefly, Andrea?
Yeah, of course. If it's possible, is it possible to find some solution at the COVID problems in our neighborhood?
Okay. Professor Ornelas?
Yes, of course. In my day life, I am an activist of preventing COVID in my neighborhood. All day. I use masks since March. With my neighbors, I distinguish very well, try to distinguish physical distancing and communication. We communicate, but with physical distancing. And I talk with them, with people that are not using masks, because many people are not using masks. They think that they need. So we discuss this. We try to be role models to the community. We try to implement the decisions that are more efficient. So I have been, at least as a person, as a citizen, I've been using my knowledge in order to increase, to build a community safe of the COVID. We very much, my family, it's my son, it's very activist in the school. He's very aware of how to do it. And we are very activists in the neighborhood to protect ourselves and to protect our neighbors.
Thank you.
I think I've got another example of something that's like a little bit different. So in my neighborhood, we have WhatsApp groups of street level WhatsApp groups. And that's all very well, and people make sure that everybody gets information, and there's a bit of sharing. If somebody wants something, they say, has anybody got something, and that goes on. So we were thinking, well, okay, well, what can we do with this? Because it's nice, people know each other better, but it doesn't actually, it's not going to change anything. So one of the things that we've done in our a group of 3 streets is to start changing the conversation away from COVID and away from just sharing, to say, hasn't it been nice not having so many cars? What can we do to keep this situation in a recovery? And through a process of both Zoom meetings and WhatsApp conversations and posting things through letterboxes for people who aren't connected, we organised a proposal to a government fund to have traffic restrictions on our group of streets, and we didn't get the funding for it. But what we have got is people committed to a longer term traffic reduction. Sounds good. They're not committed to getting rid of their cars. So they'll still keep their cars, but they are committed to trying to reduce the cars coming through this group of streets and to try and reduce the cars parking on the pavements or the sidewalks. And that begins a political awareness and political discussion around, in this case, climate issues. And I've got a similar example around economic issues, but I'll leave that for now. But I think that's just a kind of example about how you can work with a group beyond just the COVID response to perhaps moving towards dealing with some of the big issues that we have to deal with following COVID.
Thank you, Caroline. Fortuna, do you want to add anything?
No, we wait always all for work in this direction. I think it's a very good meeting tonight, very stimulate for idea and other work. The activity, the action, we have different example, but I think the work is more big in different level, and I hope stay together in to work in this direction.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments? I have a question for Professor Ornelas, and maybe also Carolyn and Fortuna can answer as well, because I was really it was really interesting to think about the issue of institutionalization in this moment. I think it's really important, really transversal. And so I would like to ask you, what can we do? What can we do more to challenge, to struggle against this new wave of institutionalization of youth, of people with mental health experiences, of migrants, of, I don't know, everywhere. We're just of elderly. We're just seeing really new total institutions coming up. What can we do?
I have noticed a very great interest from the media and from the politicians, the decision makers, and the social influencers criticizing these concentrate solutions. They are very critical, but they don't have the knowledge to present alternatives. For example, about the elderly. The journalists are very interested. This is not good. This is what they have been, the titles of journals. They are, this is the expecting death of our old people. This is unacceptable, but they don't present, they are looking for ideas. So, and we have experience. Community psychology, we have about 50 years of experience and knowledge and research of the institutionalization. We have to give some ideas, suggestions for about the elderly, how to move the elderly to the community, how to support them in the house. They have many questions, but how an elder person with Alzheimer can be in a house and how they can survive. How we have to explain it's a team that supports them in the house and in the community, and how to sensitize the neighbors to support that person, to pay attention to any needs. So because we have a long experience, particularly with the housing first, we have learned for the last decade, as you know, how to work with people with profound severe mental illness, listen voices all the time, and how they move and how they connect with the neighbors, how they keep their house. So we have learned so much, particularly our colleagues from the United States. They've learned about the disabled people, disability, with syndrome Down, with the mental disabled, how to keep them. So we have the knowledge. Now try to transmit this to the medias, to the journalists, to the decision makers. They want to change. They said, okay, we pay about 3,000 euros for the elder to be in a nursery. So if we move them that money to the house, but how to do it and to work well. So it's this knowledge that they need. And I think we have the privilege to have the knowledge, to have the experience, and to have the research, the scientific evidence that it's better. It's, for example, our Horizon project to demonstrate, for example, with the people in the housing, they increase their recovery, reduce the medication use and the alcohol and drug use. They feel they have more quality of life. So so many good research and evidence that demonstrates that more integrate, more individualized, more it's better, works better and cheaper, and it's cheaper. A old person, it's cheaper to live in their houses with very good personal support, team support, than in those nurseries. For example, with the mental illness, we know that it's cheaper, half of the price, people living in the housing first than in an hospital, in a psychiatric hospital. So people are very sensitive to big institutions. Try to demonstrate how it works in the community. It's my suggestion.
Thank you. Yeah, please, Caroline.
I think we have to think about what these new institutions are, because I think they're quite different from each other. Certainly in the UK, institutionalization of migrants and refugees is underpinned by an extremely right-wing immigration policy. Institutionalization of older people is underpinned by a whole raft of policies that are to do with workplaces of younger family members, are to do with housing policy. So people get penalized if they're in social housing, if they have a spare bedroom, for example. So they can't take a share in looking after an elderly person in their home because they don't have space. All sorts of different policies around older prisons, and the institutionalization of prisons is underpinned by an extremely hostile, again, right-wing set of policies around crime and crime prevention. So I think the reasons for institutionalization are different. But I think some of the solutions, as José just outlined, are very well known. But those teams that surround people to help them stay in their own homes and be part of a community don't have to be paid professionals. They can be made up of neighbours, or they can have contributions from neighbours and family members and so on. So we have examples in some of our work of intellectually disabled young people who've been able to live in their own homes on models that have been developed by families along with public service workers. So, for example, parents of young people might work some shifts if they have to have full-time carers in the homes. That's a completely different kind of model from paid carers have to be there all the time. One of the consequences of community-based care for elders in the UK has not related to those circles of support around people, but related to multi-generational households, has been that those have been sites of transmission of COVID. And that is a problematic idea, particularly when multi-generational households are more common in some minority communities than in the majority community. So where people support their elders by having them living in their own homes, several generations of a household, that's been a real risk factor for the spread of COVID.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it was really...
Let me add one thing. One of the things that the decision makers are discussing right now is instead of integrating, they are trying to contract more professionals for those big institutions. That it's not a good solution. And it's more expensive for the state, and it's not, they don't protect from the COVID, and they're not changed. They are contracting. Here in Portugal, now the discuss is how many nurses do you need in the nursery? How many doctors? How many this? How many that? And it's infinite. They never stop contracting more and more and more and more, and instead of alternative. So we should demonstrate an alternative. Moving to the community, you need less professionals. It's safer about the COVID and other future diseases. It's more ecological. Instead of contracting more people for the centers for the refugees and other institutions. Just doing this.
No, very important, and I think there is important research that has been done, important work, and maybe we really need to somehow to disseminate this work, to make this work more visible for us to use as a community of community psychologists and try to advocate for these community alternatives, because it's really worrisome what is happening. So we need to find ways to challenge this, to oppose this process. Otherwise, we kind of forget. We lose all the achievements we have been making in the history. So yeah. Fortuna, do you want to?
Yeah. No, we have the rich conversation. I don't even sure understand very well your question, but intuition. I add only this. I think we have to work for the more visibility, more. We not only for the professional, for the activity of the people. For example, we have different experience in neighbors, in some area of the country, of our country, where in a part of the work is concentrated about the give the visibility, the work, the people, and show other people don't participate directly in their activity. And this is very to create the change. This is an aspect. Another step we have to work, I think, have to work with the association, with the cooperative, to work with them to give this organization a visibility about their work, and to have a question about the association in which way their work have an impact over the citizen and community, because this aspect sometimes the mission of the association is very inside, very in a specific group, but not have a divulgation have an impact in community where you stay or where work these people. But this is the reflection, but we have time to develop this aspect in this action.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we are almost ending, right, Martina? The discussion was so interesting that we went a bit over our our time, and so maybe I'll just thank all the speakers for really the great contributions. It was a really interesting, I think, and important discussion. And I hope to see everybody later at the assembly, right? Thank you.
Right.